A daughter trying to take revenge to return her stolen property. In Savannah, Georgia, Elizabeth Harper blames her estranged husband, James, for accidentally killing his cunning friend, Thomas, who plotted to take over their historic estate. Their daughter, Clara, finds out and plots revenge. The story begins. Everyone, please subscribe to my Sweet Revenge YouTube channel. Savannah, Georgia, hummed with the weight of its past, where ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss whispered secrets older than the city itself. The Harper estate loomed at the edge of town, its white columns gleaming under the July sun, a fading monument to Southern pride. But inside, the air was heavy with decay, not of wood or paint, but of trust, of love, of legacy. Elizabeth Harper, 45, stood on the veranda, her emerald eyes scanning the horizon like a general surveying a battlefield. Her auburn hair was pulled tight, not a strand out of place, a reflection of the iron will that had kept the estate in her family for generations. Her father's words echoed in her mind, blood and land are one. Elizabeth never let either slip away. But the land was all she had left. The family fortune, once a river of wealth, had dried to a trickle, siphoned off by her estranged husband, James Harper, 47, slouched in a dim corner of O'Malley's bar downtown, the stink of stale beer and regret clinging to him. His once boyish charm had curdled into a permanent scowl, his hazel eyes bloodshot from too many nights drowning his failures in whiskey. He'd been a dreamer, chasing oil deals and tech startups that promised millions but delivered only dead. Now, he was a ghost of the man Elizabeth had married, nursing a grudge as bitter as the drink in his hand. Thomas Reed, his old college buddy and business partner, sat across from him, his slick gray suit out of place in the grimy bar. At 50, Thomas had the polished menace of a man who thrived on others' ruin. "She's laughing at you, Jim," Thomas said, his voice low, venomous. "Elizabeth's got millions stashed away, offshore accounts, secret trusts. You're out here scraping by. And she's sitting pretty in that mansion." James's grip tightened on his glass, knuckles white. "She wouldn't," he muttered, but doubt gnawed at him. "Would she? Think about it," Thomas pressed, leaning closer, his eyes glinting like a predator's. "Why's she so calm? She's playing you, always has. You want what's yours? Confront her, demand answers." James stared into his drink, the amber liquid swirling like his thoughts. He wanted to believe Elizabeth wouldn't betray him, but the years of her cold silences, her sharp dismissals, made Thomas's words feel like truth. "I'll talk to her," James said finally, his voice thick with resolve and rage. Thomas smirked, pouring another shot. "That's the spirit, Jim. Take what's yours." Clara Harper, 22, was the only spark of hope in this crumbling dynasty. Fresh from college, her journalist's instincts burned bright, her hazel eyes, so like her father's, sharp with curiosity. She'd returned to Savannah to write a feature on the city's fading plantations. But the Harper estate drew her like a moth to flame. She wandered its creaking halls, her sneakers scuffing the polished oak floors, her notebook filled with questions. The estate was her mother's pride, but Clara sensed a darkness beneath its grandeur. Late one night, in the attic's dust-choked shadows, she found a locked trunk. Her heart thudded as she pried it open, revealing ledgers yellowed with age. The numbers didn't add up, investments funneled through shell companies, funds vanishing into accounts she didn't recognize. Her mother's signature was nowhere. Instead, Thomas Reed's name appeared, a spider at the center of a web of fraud. Clara's hands trembled as she pored over the documents by lamplight, the attic's silence broken only by the creak of the house settling. Thomas had orchestrated the family's ruin, pinning it on her father's reckless bets. He'd manipulated James, stoked his resentment, all to seize the estate for himself. Developers had been circling, offering millions to turn the land into condos and strip malls. Thomas wanted it all. Clara's stomach churned with betrayal, not just Thomas's, but her father's for believing him. She had to tell James, had to save him from himself. She found him the next evening at a seedy motel on the city's edge, the neon sign flickering like a dying star. James reeked of whiskey, his shirt rumpled, his eyes wild. "Dad, listen to me," Clara pleaded, shoving the ledgers into his hands. "Thomas has been lying. He's the one who bankrupted us. Not Mom. He's after the estate." James's face twisted, disbelief warring with fury. "You're wrong," he growled, but his voice cracked. He flipped through the pages. his breath hitching as the truth sank in. That bastard, he whispered, his hands shaking. He played me. We can fix this, Clara said, her voice urgent, her heart pounding with hope. We'll go to the police. Expose him. But James's eyes darkened, a storm brewing. No, he said, his voice low. Dangerous. I'll handle Thomas myself. Clara grabbed his arm, panic rising. Dad, don't. Let me help you. But James pulled away, his jaw set. Stay out of this. Clara, this is between me and him. He stormed out, the motel door slamming like a gunshot. Clara stood frozen, dread pooling in her chest. The air felt thick, the moss-draped oaks outside seeming to lean closer, as if the city itself knew a tragedy was coming. The Savannah River churned under a moonless sky, its inky waters swallowing the city's secrets. The warehouse district, a forgotten corner of Savannah, Georgia, reeked of rust and decay. Its crumbling buildings hunched like ghosts against the night. Inside a derelict warehouse, the air was thick with the tang of oil and betrayal. James Harper, 47, stood in the flickering glow of a single bulb, his hands clutching Clara's damning ledgers. The pages crumpled from his tightening grip. His hazel eyes burned with a fury he hadn't felt in years. The kind that had once fueled his dreams but now drove him toward ruin. His rumpled jacket hung loose on his frame, a stark contrast to the man he'd been, a charmer who'd once believed he could conquer the world. Now, he was a husk, hollowed by failure and Thomas Reed's lies. The ledgers were proof. Thomas, his so-called friend, had bled the Harper fortune dry, framing James as the fool who'd lost it all. Footsteps echoed on the concrete. Sharp and deliberate, Thomas Reed, 50, stepped into the light, his polished loafers clicking like a predator's claws. His gray suit was immaculate, his smirk sharper than a blade. What's this about, Jim? He asked, his voice smooth as river silt, but his eyes glinted with wariness. He adjusted his cufflinks, a casual gesture that screamed control. James's breath hitched, his heart pounding like a war drum. He threw the ledgers at Thomas's feet, papers scattering like broken promises. You lying bastard, James spat, his voice raw, trembling with rage. You stole everything, our money, our future, and you let me take the fall. Thomas's smirk didn't waver. He glanced at the papers, then back at James, his laugh cutting through the stale air like a knife. You're pathetic, Jim, he said, his tone dripping with contempt. You think you're the victim? You were always too weak to hold on to what mattered. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a venomous hiss. Elizabeth knew. You know, she let you drown in your own mess. She's been playing you for years, hoarding millions while you begged for scraps. The lie was a spark to dry tinder. James's vision blurred, red-hot anger surging through him. Don't you dare bring her into this, he roared, his fists clenching. You're the snake here, Thomas. You wanted the estate, didn't you? For your developer buddies to carve it up? Thomas's laugh grew colder, echoing off the rusted walls. You're out of your depth, Jim. Always were. He turned to leave, dismissing James with a flick of his wrist. That was the breaking point. James lunged, a snarl tearing from his throat, his hands grabbing Thomas's collar. The men grappled, their struggle a chaotic dance of rage and desperation. Crates toppled, splintering on the concrete, as James shoved Thomas with all his strength. Thomas stumbled, his polished shoes slipping, and his head struck a steel beam with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring blankly at the rafters above. The warehouse fell silent, save for James's ragged breathing. James staggered back, his hands trembling, stained with the weight of what he'd done. No, no, he whispered, his voice breaking as he knelt beside Thomas's body. The man who'd ruined him was dead. But there was no triumph, only a hollow dread. His heart thundered, the reality crashing over him like a tidal wave. He was a murderer. The ledgers lay scattered, their truth now a curse. He scrambled to gather them, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the pages. The river outside seemed to roar louder, as if urging him to hide his sin in its depths. Clara Harper, 22, arrived too late, her sneakers skidding on the warehouse floor as she burst through the rusted door. Her scream shattered the silence, a raw, guttural sound that tore at her throat. Dad, she cried, dropping to her knees beside him, her hazel eyes wide with horror. Thomas's lifeless form sprawled before her, the blood a dark mirror reflecting her fear. What did you do? She whispered, her voice trembling as she grabbed James's arm. His face was ashen, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. It was an accident, he choked out, his voice barely audible. He laughed at me. Clara, he said your mother betrayed us. I didn't mean to. His words dissolved into a sob, his hands clutching at her like a lifeline. Clara's mind raced, panic clawing at her chest. The journalist in her wanted to call the police, to expose Thomas's fraud, but the daughter in her saw her father's brokenness, his life hanging by a thread. We have to fix this, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She pulled him to his feet, her hands steady despite the terror in her heart. We'll burn the papers. We'll hide him. Her words felt foreign, as if someone else were speaking. They dragged Thomas's body to the river's edge, the night cloaking their crime. The current swallowed him whole, the water rippling as if it, too, wanted to forget. Clara's hands shook as they burned the ledgers in a rusted barrel, the flames licking at the truth she'd fought to uncover. Back at the motel, Clara's resolve crumbled. She sat on the sagging bed, the stench of mildew and guilt choking her. We can't tell Mom, James said, his voice hollow, his eyes avoiding hers. She'll never forgive me. Clara nodded, but her heart ached. She needed her mother's strength, her certainty. Against her better judgment, she drove to the Harper estate at dawn, the mansion looming like a judge in the pale light. Elizabeth stood in the parlor, her silk robe pristine, her face unreadable. Clara, what's wrong? She asked, her voice calm but edged with suspicion, her green eyes piercing. Clara broke, the words spilling out like a confession. Dad, he killed Thomas. It was an accident. I helped him hide it. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. Thomas was the one who ruined us. Mom, he lied, stole everything. I found proof. But now, she trailed off, expecting rage, despair, anything but the icy calm in Elizabeth's eyes. Elizabeth stepped closer, her hand resting on Clara's shoulder, her touch cold as marble. You did what you had to, she said, her voice steady, almost soothing. We'll fix this, Clara, I promise. But as Elizabeth turned away, her mind was already spinning, a spider weaving a deadly web. James had betrayed her, believed Thomas's lies over her, and now his recklessness had stained their daughter's hands. She saw not just a way to save Clara, but to punish James for years of failure, for daring to doubt her. The estate's grandfather clock ticked in the silence, its rhythm like a heartbeat counting down to vengeance. Outside, the oaks swayed, their moss trailing like tears, as if Savannah itself mourned the tragedy unfolding within the Harper family. The Harper estate stood sentinel over Savannah, Georgia, its white columns glowing under a bruised August sky. But inside, the air was thick with treachery. Elizabeth Harper, 45, moved through the mansion's grand parlor like a queen plotting a coup. Her emerald eyes cold as polished jade. Her auburn hair, usually a perfect chignon, bore a single loose strand, a rare crack in her impeccable facade. The weight of Clara's confession pressed against her chest, not with grief but with opportunity. James, her estranged husband, had killed Thomas Reed, his scheming friend who'd bled their fortune dry. Clara, their 22-year-old daughter, had helped hide the body, her hands stained by a crime she hadn't committed. Elizabeth's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile as she stood by the parlor's tall windows, the Spanish moss outside swaying like a noose in the humid breeze. James had believed Thomas's lies, accused her of hoarding wealth while he squandered their legacy. Now, he'd handed her the perfect weapon to destroy him. Elizabeth's mind worked like a loom, weaving a plan as intricate as the estate's antique tapestries. She sat at her mahogany desk, the lamplight casting sharp shadows across her face, and opened her laptop. Her fingers flew over the keys, crafting a forged email from James to Thomas, dated the night of the murder. You've gone too far. Reed, meet me at the warehouse. You'll pay for what you've done. She planted it in James's personal account, her movements precise, her pulse steady. Next, she slipped into the garage, where James's old sedan sat, reeking of whiskey and regret. She smeared a bloodied rag, stained with pig's blood from a butcher, under the driver's seat. Her hands gloved, her heart colder than the steel she touched. The final touch was an anonymous call to the Savannah PD. Her voice disguised, low and urgent. Check James Harper's car. You'll find what you're looking for. She hung up, the click of the phone like the snap of a trap. The police descended on James's motel the next morning, their sirens slicing through the dawn. Clara, still reeling from the warehouse horror, watched from a distance, her hazel eyes wide with dread, her journalist's notebook clutched like a lifeline. James stumbled out, unshaven, his shirt untucked, his face a map of confusion and fear. "What's this about?" he shouted as officers cuffed him, their faces grim. "I didn't do anything, but the evidence was damning. The email. The rag. A witness, paid by Elizabeth's discreet funds, claiming they'd seen James near the warehouse that night." Clara's stomach churned as she overheard the charges. Murder in the first degree. Her father's pleas echoed in her ears. It was an accident, but the world saw only a failed man-turned-killer. The trial was a blur. A public execution in Savannah's courthouse, where the Harper name was dragged through the mud. James was sentenced to life, his eyes meeting Clara's in the courtroom. A silent apology she couldn't accept. Clara's world fractured. She'd trusted her mother to save them, to wield her fierce intellect to protect their family. But as weeks passed, suspicion gnawed at her like damp rot in the estate's walls. She slipped into Elizabeth's study one night, the mansion silent save for the creak of floorboards under her sneakers. The laptop glowed, a forbidden beacon. Clara's hands trembled as she hacked the password. Her mother's arrogance hadn't bothered with complexity. There, in a hidden folder, was the forged email, its metadata revealing Elizabeth's creation. Clara's breath caught, her heart a hammer against her ribs. "No," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Her mother hadn't saved them, she'd orchestrated James's downfall. A puppeteer cutting the strings of her own family. The confrontation came at dusk. The parlor bathed in the golden glow of a dying sun. Clara stood trembling, the printed email clutched in her hand, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this," she spat, thrusting the paper at Elizabeth. "You framed Dad. You let him rot for something you planned." Elizabeth stood by the fireplace, her silk blouse pristine, her face a mask of icy calm. "Clara, you don't understand," she said, her voice low, almost soothing, but with an edge sharp enough to cut. "Your father betrayed us first. He believed Thomas's lies, turned against me. He was weak, always was. I protected our legacy." "Protected?" Clara's voice broke, a sob choking her words. "You destroyed him. You destroyed us." Her hands shook, the email crumpling in her fist. "I helped him because I thought we could fix it. But you used me to ruin him." Elizabeth's eyes flickered, a shadow of guilt passing like a cloud. But she straightened, her chin lifting. "He deserved it," she said coldly. "He doubted me, doubted us. The estate is all we have left. Clara, I did what I had to." Clara staggered back, the room spinning, the portraits of her ancestors on the walls staring down like judges. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice raw. "You're not my mother anymore." Clara stormed out, her footsteps echoing through the grand hall, each one a severance. She packed a single bag, her journalist's notebook tucked inside, and drove away from the estate, the oak-lined drive blurring through her tears. The moss-draped trees seemed to bow in mourning, their shadows stretching long across the road. Elizabeth stood alone in the parlor, the fire's embers dying, the silence deafening. She'd won, hadn't she? James was gone, the estate secured, Thomas's schemes buried in the river's depths. But the victory was a blade turned inward. Clara, her only child, was gone, her love replaced by hatred. The grandfather clock ticked on, its rhythm a mocking heartbeat, counting the cost of Elizabeth's vengeance. Outside, Savannah's humid air pressed close, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for the final act of the Harper tragedy. The Harper estate stood like a mausoleum under Savannah, Georgia's autumn sky, its white columns stained with the faintest cracks, as if the house itself bore the scars of its family's ruin. September's breeze stirred the Spanish moss, trailing from ancient oaks like tattered veils, whispering of secrets too heavy to bury. Elizabeth Harper, 45, stood alone on the veranda, her emerald eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for something, absolution, perhaps, or the ghost of her daughter. Her auburn hair, once a crown of authority, hung loose, strands catching the wind, a rare surrender to disorder. The estate was hers, preserved against the vultures of debt and developers. But it was a hollow victory, its grandeur mocking her solitude. James, her estranged husband, rotted in a prison cell, framed for Thomas Reed's murder. Clara, her 22-year-old daughter, had fled, her love replaced by a wound that bled through every article she published. exposing the Harper legacy as a tapestry of lies. Elizabeth's hand tightened on the veranda's railing, the wood cool and unyielding, a reminder of the empire she'd fought to save, and the family she'd lost. The mansion's halls echoed with absence. Elizabeth wandered them at night, her silk robe trailing like a specter's shroud, the creak of oak floors her only companion. The parlor's grandfather clock ticked relentlessly, its pendulum a metronome of guilt. She'd orchestrated James's downfall with surgical precision, forged emails, planted evidence, a bloodied rag, all to punish his betrayal, his belief in Thomas's venomous lies. Thomas, the snake who'd bled their fortune dry, was dead by James's hand, an accident born of rage. But Elizabeth had turned it into a noose. She'd protected Clara from the law, shielded the estate from ruin. But the cost was her daughter's heart. Clara's final words, "You're not my mother anymore," haunted Elizabeth, sharper than any blade. The mirrors in the estate reflected a stranger, a woman whose strength had become her curse. Her face etched with lines of pride and regret. Savannah buzzed with the scandal. The Harper name now a synonym for betrayal. Clara's articles, published in the New York Times, peeled back the estate's veneer, revealing Thomas's fraud and Elizabeth's ruthless vengeance. The Harper legacy, a Southern dynasty built on deceit. One headline screamed, each word a dagger. Elizabeth hosted lavish fundraisers to keep the developers at bay, her smile a polished mask as Savannah's elite sipped champagne in the ballroom. "Such a tragedy," they murmured, their eyes glinting with schadenfreude. "But you've kept the estate intact." "Elizabeth, remarkable," she nodded, her voice smooth as velvet. "The Harper name endures." But the words tasted like ash. The estate endured, but her family did not. One evening, Elizabeth sat in her study, the lamplight casting long shadows across the mahogany desk. A stack of Clara's letters, sent from New York, lay unopened, returned with, refused, scrawled in her daughter's sharp hand. Elizabeth traced the ink, her fingers trembling, a crack in her iron resolve. "Clara," she whispered, her voice breaking in the silence. She'd called, left voicemails, each one unanswered. "Please, come home, let me explain." But Clara's silence was louder than any accusation. Elizabeth's gaze fell on a hidden drawer, where the forged email's backup lay, a digital ghost of her sin. She pulled it out, a USB drive small enough to hold her downfall, and walked to the parlor's fireplace. The flames roared, hungry for sacrifice. "No more lies," she murmured, tossing the drive into the fire. The plastic melted, the truth consumed, but it brought no relief. The clock ticked on, indifferent. James haunted her dreams, his face gaunt behind prison bars, his voice a low rasp. "You did this. Elizabeth, you chose the land over us." She woke each night, her silk sheets tangled, her breath ragged. She'd visited him once, driving to the state penitentiary under a gray dawn. He sat across the glass, his hazel eyes, Clara's eyes, hollow. "Why?" he'd asked, his voice raw. "I loved you once." Elizabeth's throat tightened, but her words were steel. "You betrayed me first. James, you believed him." He laughed, a bitter sound, "and you destroyed me for it. What's left of you now?" "Liz? That house?" She'd left without answering, the prison's clang echoing like a judgment. The estate's grounds stretched vast and silent, the oaks standing like sentinels. Elizabeth walked them at midnight, the grass damp under her bare feet, the air thick with jasmine and regret. She paused by the old fountain, its stone angels weathered, their eyes blind to her sins. "I did it for you," she whispered, as if Clara could hear her across the miles. "For the legacy." But the words rang false. The legacy was a chain, binding her to a throne of ashes. She'd won her war, James punished, Thomas dead, the estate hers, but the battlefield was barren. The developers still circled, their offers piling up in her inbox. A reminder that even her victory was temporary. In New York, Clara thrived, her bylines a beacon of truth. But her heart carried Savannah's weight. She dreamed of the estate, its moss-draped oaks calling her back. But she refused to return. Elizabeth's letters piled up, unopened, a wall against her mother's voice. "She chose vengeance over me," Clara told her editor, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "I can't forgive that." Yet she kept a photo of the estate, tucked in her wallet, a reminder of the home she'd lost. Elizabeth stood on the veranda one final dawn, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Savannah waking around her, the estate loomed behind, its beauty a lie, its silence a sentence. She'd protected her father's dream, the land and blood he'd prized. But the blood was gone. Clara's love, James's trust, her own soul. Was it worth it? She asked the oaks. Her voice a whisper swallowed by the wind. They gave no answer, their moss trailing like tears. The Harper tragedy wasn't James's crime or Thomas's death, it was Elizabeth herself. A queen crowned in ruin, reigning over a kingdom of ghosts. If you find the story interesting, please like and share this video and leave a comment with your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Revenge and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos.